Will you fill me up, bread of heaven, fill me, enlighten me, bright and morning star, build me up, master builder, build me, empower me, mighty great I am. Fill me up, fill me up, fill me up.
Good morning, family. You know, I saw so many newcomers and visitors coming our way. We just want to say a very special welcome and thank you for being with us today. We know that you have busy schedules and lives, but it is always valuable to put God at the first of our priority list and keep Him there. I've already been lifted up. Thank you, Paul, for our singing. What a blessing to be together today. We have a lot of community partners that our church family is with and does work with here in the community. One of those partners is Grace House, and I believe Sarah Tucker is with us today in the back there in the foyer, or she may be in here, but she will be right back there with a little booth and information. This is Sanctity of Life Sunday. It's one Sunday of year that's been identified to remind us and to energize us towards God's view of life as opposed to man's view. It's to raise that bar and to keep it up. And what a great work Grace House and the Options Clinic does here in town for so many people in crisis. If you know of someone who is in crisis, feel free to stop and visit with Sarah or pick up some information at the back. There's also a little sign-up list if you'd like to be kept updated, or if you would like to volunteer to a good community cause. There's also a sign-up list for that as well. So please take a moment to stop in there and visit a bit. You know, we're all getting used to these new microphones. And how's it going with you, Paul? So far, so good. Lori leaned over this morning and goes, "Is this training to get you ready for hearing aids?" I didn't think that was very funny. I just said, "What?" We're in John chapter 15. John chapter 15, the Gospel of John, the good news of the life of Christ, what Jesus did, what He said, where He went, who He spent time with, His sermons, His encouragements, His rebukes are all gathered in John 15. And in John 15, verse 1, it says, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, He takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, He prunes it that it may bear more fruit. You are already clean because of the word which I have spoken to you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, so neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me, and I in him, he bears much fruit, for apart from me, you can do nothing." I hope that you've been thinking about this phrase, abide, as our theme in both in your life, because we need it. Have you ever noticed that in your life there are so many roles and so many areas in which you expect and desire people to abide or connect or remain with you? I mean, there's literally dozens, like the student who's struggling in class and wants the teacher to not only come and teach the class, but then maybe stay after class and partner and work with and teach and instruct and fill in the blanks of things he or she did not know. How many of you had a teacher who did things like that? I have. They saved my life academically. I was so thankful for my chemistry teacher. Wow, I would have never survived without her. Later on, I learned that she was a Christian, and I wasn't surprised at all because she showed me Jesus in her classroom. What about the athlete who desires a coach, who takes that extra time to point out the areas they need to work on, and then maybe stays after practice to talk to them? And not only that, but partners with them in life when they're hurting and comes alongside of them like a father figure or a mother figure and encourages and teaches them things that they need to know. There's so many areas, wives with husbands, husbands with wives. We don't want someone to storm out, to give up the moment there's problems. Employers desire workers who will connect with what their business is about, that will see their vision and plug into that vision to build their company. They don't just want someone who says, what's the least I can do? Employers want those who are going over and above. Workers want an employer who will hang in there with them and not fire them the first time they make a mistake. Children need parents who understand there's going to be good days and there's going to be bad days. But we are called to consistently love one another in family. In our world today, I met so many people who have broken families and wounds from their past. How about you? And one of the great areas where the church steps in and stands in the gap, so to speak, is in this area of physical family on earth. When you don't have mother and father, who do you turn to? Hopefully folks can turn to their church family. And this is one of the reasons that we as a church have to rise up and think of ourselves in a different way than maybe we always have thought. Friends don't need someone who checks out when they're hurting, right? I mean, it's easy to show up for the parties. It's easy to show up for celebration, but abiding and remaining and walking with through grief, through struggle, through divorce, through addiction, through whatever it may be, that truly is a friend who is abiding with you. I want you to notice in John 15, if you will, that this abiding is a two-way street. Jesus has already said, I will abide with you. The only question here is whether or not you and I will do the same. And he says, if we abide in him, we will bear fruit. Without abiding or connecting or walking and living with Jesus, we cannot bear fruit. You know, isn't it sad? Some of you know what it's like to have a person check out. Maybe when you really needed help, the person that you relied on the most walked out, checked out, or rejected you at that moment. And you felt the sting and the pain, and maybe it still wounds your heart today. Maybe it was a parent, maybe it was a child, a coworker, a really good friend that you thought you could call when there's a crisis, and they just sort of glossed that over and didn't respond, didn't come to help, didn't come alongside you. And that really can hurt us, and we remember that. Jesus knows how that feels. You know, it's interesting, over in Matthew chapter 26, verse 56, Matthew in his gospel records that when Jesus was arrested, everyone left him and fled for their lives. You know, when it got hot and when he needed help, when he needed encouragement, what happened? Man, everybody was gone. His disciples were gone. They ran for their lives. What does that tell us? Jesus didn't go off mission. He didn't give up on the cause. He kept moving forward, even all by himself. Why? Because he knew God was abiding in, with, and through him. Do you? Do you? Even among the apostles, the lack of abiding occurred. Paul and Barnabas had that happen in Acts chapter 13 with John Mark when they were on the first missionary journey. And we learned there that they were doing some good things, but that John Mark departed and went back home. We don't fully know why. He doesn't go on to say because his sister was sick or his father died or anything like that. It just says he checked out and went back home. Well, then a couple chapters later, when they are going to make a second missionary journey to go back and check on these churches, Barnabas wanted to take John Mark. And you know what Paul said? No way. We're not taking him. Why? Because he did not abide. He checked out when I needed him. And they had a sharp disagreement and division. You know how God used that disagreement? He built 2 missionary teams out of that. Barnabas took John, and Paul and another partner went their way, and God turned a problem into a blessing. And at times he does that, and it surprises us, although it shouldn't. Even when folks don't abide with us. People are fallible. Remember this, Jesus is not. So when Jesus says, I'm going to abide with you, he means it 100%. 2 quick points here. If you want to be successful in pretty much any worthwhile endeavor, you need to understand you're going to have to persevere. If you want people to trust you, you're going to have to move beyond barriers. You say, well, I believe in God. Why are there barriers? There have never not been barriers on this earth. We live in a sin-infected planet. If Jesus had struggles, if the apostles had struggles, had people that checked out on them, why are we surprised when people check out on us? They are people. They are fallible. You likely have checked out on a few yourself. But don't let that distract you from the mission of God, because the mission is bigger than any one of us. Point number 2, sometimes people do fall away. Sometimes they give up. Sometimes they walk out. But that does not mean you should join them. You know, we see what happened when Paul and Barnabas, they disagreed and they had strife, but what did they do? They went. They went out, and they impacted people for good, for the gospel. And that would have been a point at which maybe Paul said, well, that's it. I'm done with this. And I'm going back to tent making. And I'm not going to preach anymore because I disagree with you guys, and I'm never going to deal with you again. You know people that way? They're all around us, aren't they? Don't allow the actions of others or the failures of others to become your failure. That's true in business. That's true in family. That's true in friendships, whatever it may be. There are just simply people who are going to let you down. That's not God. God has never let anyone down and is always planning to work something good for you. Jesus will never give up. He'll never stop abiding unless you scream at him and say, leave me alone. You know, in fact, over a dozen times in Scripture, either God or Christ said, I will never leave you or forsake you. Kind of sounds like God's driving home a point, doesn't it? Kind of sounds like he's saying, hey, you don't have to worry about me. I got your back. Now, can he count on you? Can he count on me? We're going to kind of shift here a little bit and come back to our text because there's some really interesting teachings that exist here, even from the original language of this text. You may have noticed there are 2 types of vine pruning or care that take place in this passage. And in verse 2, you see there is the branch that's not bearing fruit. And then in verse 6, there's the branch that is not abiding in me and likely, probably, certainly not bearing fruit as well. But they're handled 2 different ways. One is pruned, the other one is taken away and burned. Well, there's an interesting word here in the Greek that comes out of this word take away, eros, and it's actually translated another way in several places. It's translated lifts up. So as you read that passage, every branch in me that does not bear fruit, verse 2, he lifts up. And every branch that bears fruit, he prunes it that it may bear more fruit. Jesus used this word in the same way in John chapter 5 and verse 8 when he healed the man at Bethesda. And he said, take up your pallet and walk. He didn't say, take your pallet and throw it away. He said, lift up your pallet and walk. It's used also in John chapter 8 when the Jews took up or picked up stones to stone Jesus with. Not a pretty picture, but it does drive home a point. They didn't pick up stones and cast them aside. They lifted them up to use. If that's true in this passage, and if it's possible that's the case, then it would match very well what we know about vineyard care, both today and then. That one of the main qualities of a good vine dresser or a good gardener was that he took care of the grapevines while they were growing. And so when a grapevine would fall to the ground, they would immediately go and lift up that grapevine, retie it to the trellis so that it could grow, stay clean, and produce fruit. Make sense? So as we think about this statement that Jesus is making, it helps to know that. And that's the difference that we see here. In verse 6, you'll notice the branches have become disconnected from the vine. So there's no hope. They're dead. They're withering. And what do? You gather them up and get them out of the vineyard. Why? Because they harbor insects. They harbor disease. In fact, vineyard people will tell you one of the worst things that can happen is to leave trash like that around your grapevines. Also, when vines fall and touch the ground, mildew is one of the worst enemies of healthy grapes. And so immediately they have to address that, tie them up, and clean that. Well, what's the big deal about that? Number one, God is that vine dresser. And so what Jesus is saying is, as the vine dresser, he's not giving up on those attached branches that have fallen. He's coming along, lifting them up, tying them off, and giving them a shot, even after they've fallen, to produce fruit. Number two, when we stumble, we desperately need to stay connected to Christ. Just because you stumble doesn't mean you're disconnected. All of us have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Don't give up, is what this passage is teaching. God hasn't. God is the vine dresser. If you're, the branch that's still connected but dirty and on the ground, he's the one who's lifting, cleaning, and tying. And so he's abiding in you. You just need to stay clearly connected and abide in him. And number three, we want to remember that verse 6 is still true, that when we disconnect, when we choose to walk away from God, when we say, I don't need God, we're helpless. We are burned. We are taken away and removed. It's interesting to think about how many folks, when they're hurting, run away from church when we should run to it. But on the other side of that coin, how good are we, church, at looking for and redeeming those who are stumbled, fallen, broken, wounded, and hurting? How transparent are we with others about our struggles, about our hurts, about our wounds? I fear that sometimes we have so many walls up that protect us that people think we're superhuman, and they don't realize we are wounded too. We are all wounded healers. And so we reach out not because we're perfect, but because we know what it's like to hurt, and we know where healing resides. The great physician. Babe Ruth was called, one of the greatest players of all time by many magazines. He's still considered to be in baseball almost untouchable in some records. He had 714 career home runs. Can you imagine? Most guys would love to hit one out. He had 40 in 11 seasons straight. Hit at least 40 home runs. He hit 60 in the midst of that as well. He had 4 World Series championships that the Yankees were in as a player. What most people don't know is that when he retired in 1935, he also held the record for the most strikeouts. You know, so in a sense, isn't it interesting? We idolize these players and we talk about their records and how great they are and phenomenal baseball. What a power hitter. How do you ever get a swing like that? It's from striking out, people. It is from striking out. And I love, he was talking in an interview with a guy, and these are his actual words that he says. I just go up there and I swing. And I just keep on swinging, and every strike brings me closer to my next home run. You see where he's focused? He's not focused on going back to the dugout, striking out, is he? He is focused on his next victory. Why? Because he believes that he's capable. He is abiding in the belief that he can hit that ball. He's strong enough to drive it out of the park and drive in runs and help his team win. So he gets up and he goes big or he goes home. And a lot of times, he went back to the dugout. He didn't go around the bases. What are you going to do? Because you're going to strike out. We are all going to get up, swing, and strike out. And maybe even your highlight reel, that's going to be captured, on YouTube. Epic failures. But that doesn't have to define you. Because Jesus says, if you're abiding in the vine, your life will be fruitful. And isn't that what we all want? We just want to bear some fruit. We want to make a difference with our children, with our community, with our country, with our church family. And we can. We just have to hang in there with God. Because He's working, He's building, and He's putting things together, even when I don't understand it or see His plans. Christ says, abide in me, and we know together, only together, we can move forward. Today, as we offer the invitation, I want to ask a favor of our shepherds and their wives. If you would, just stand wherever you're at. Elders, if you'd stand up. A lot of times, you may think, I would like to make a response of some kind or ask for help. And you might not want to walk all the way down front, and that's perfectly fine. If you would just stop and maybe tap a shoulder of one of these men or women and tell them you need prayer or you need some guidance or you need some helping. These men are here to do just that, to shepherd souls. And so the invitation is from Jesus Christ. And if you want to become a Christian, you can today. We can baptize you into Christ. If you need to come back home, whatever it may be, won't you come while together we stand and sing.